Kama wanatembea barabara, wanasema wakati yake inaisha na mishene. Tunasikia mbaya, tunasikia chungu, hii hawa ni watoto yetu. Kuishi kwa wazee ni faida na maisha mzuri. Kukaa na wazee ni faida kubwa.
Los jóvenes piensan de que porque ya somos viejos ya no servimos aquí en la sociedad, es lo que ellos piensan, ¿no? Y eso no es así. Nosotros podemos todavía seguir trabajando, haciendo una cosa, otra cosa, dando inclusive consejos a los jóvenes y todo, pero ellos piensan que hablamos de más, todas esas cosas.
Uphethwe kuluphala angifeel alright ngifika ngathi angisimuntu mina yeah ngifila ngathi angisimuntu
basiphelele ihliziyo ugogo bathi hayi ugogo asinamaphilisi akho sotholaphi ugogo ukhulile asenamaphilisi akho ukunika ugogo asamukeleki kahle nasezibhedlela.
Comme yo dit en Haïti, les mon grand monde ou pas valer ou pas dans la société ou c'est grand monde ou pas respect. Alors il dit grand.
Sí, este comportamiento de los jóvenes no está bien, porque todos desde pequeños más bien debemos prepararnos cómo queremos llegar a ser adultos mayores, porque todo el mundo va a llegar a ser adulto mayor. Entonces falta ser un poco más previsores en este caso.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to call to order the Leaders' Dialogue 5 of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, convened under the auspices of the General Assembly SDG Summit on Partnerships for Sustainable Development. So let me take this opportunity to cordially invite you all to this leaders' dialogue. Before we proceed with your contribution, let me take this opportunity to make some introductory remarks. Global partnership plays a significant role for capacity building, trade, peace and security, environmental protection, financial support, and so on. The multi-stakeholders approach should have to follow the one plan and one report approach. The stakeholders should carry out their duties and responsibilities such as supporting the development agenda technically, financially, and through capacity building. The stakeholders should understand that there is a mutual responsibility unless they are committed for development. Private sector, civil society groups, development assistance groups, and other non-government organizations should play their significant role to achieve the targets set in the SDGs and align with the principles and priorities of their governments. In case of my country, Ethiopia, it has a climate-resilient green economy strategy, and its implementation is well in progress and needs the intervention from different actors. To effectively implement the strategy, national adaptation plan, which requires a fairly huge resource and strong intervention, is also being implemented. Development partners should support government's initiatives for resilient and green economy, which should be aligned, harmonized, and integrated. Indeed, harmonizing the efforts of several development partners and stakeholders is an imperative. However, filling the gaps, avoiding redundancies, duplications, seeking more coherence and harmonization for better results are suggested for development partners in this regard. Focusing on system issues and infrastructure areas would bring significant results in achieving SDGs by 2030. Now, before calling, first of all, we would like to apologize for the absence of a co-moderator, which should have been here. His Excellency, the President of Guinea, who had an urgent meeting, which is overlapping with this one. So I'm sitting for both of us. So before calling on the first speaker on the list, may I remind delegations that statements are limited to 3 minutes. To assist speakers in managing their time, a speech timer will be projected on the screen. The clock on the speech timer will start blinking red to indicate that the speaker had only 1 minute left to conclude his or her statement. In this regard, delegations are encouraged to submit longer versions of their statements to the Secretariat for posting on the Paper Smart portal. So I really appeal to all of you to strictly follow the time limits in order to listen to all the contributions. So I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to His Excellency Danifo, the President of the Republic of Seychelles. I don't know if His Excellency is in the room.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Yes.
Governance is the key means of implementation of the SDGs, but no country can do it alone. Partnerships are required, especially taking into account the inherent challenges experienced by small island developing states. In an effort to revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development, my country, the Seychelles, carried out a global partnership monitoring exercise. We recognize the work being done by bilateral and multilateral organizations, nationally and internationally, the private sector, the civil society, parliaments and NGOs to strengthen the effectiveness of the country-level partnerships. And we thank the joint support team from the OECD and the United Nations Development Programme for providing guidance and support in the partnership exercise. As a small developing island state, Seychelles takes note of the progress achieved through partnerships, especially in the protection of the environment and diverse economic development. As an advocate and global champion of the blue economy, we continuously work towards developing and promoting this sector. Through technical assistance from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, a monetary package was allocated for the improvement of conservation and management of Seychelles' marine resources, as well as expanding seafood value chains. This does not only provide expertise for a sustainable use of our oceans, but protects the livelihoods of our people as they are strategically at the center of the country's development. The blue economy is a pathway to climate-smart, sustainable development. By conceptualizing the ocean as a development space which brings together economic, environmental, and societal constituents of the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Blue Economy Roadmap casts a strategic long-term blue policy lens on national development to guide and prioritize actions and investment across other sectors based on principles of good governance, economic efficiency, sustainability, resilience, innovation, and social equity. Furthermore, our tourism master plan mainstreams the various frameworks of sustainable development and places emphasis on sustainable tourism. It has benefited from regional cooperation and partnerships. For example, Sdgs protocol on the development of tourism, which establishes tourism as a vehicle for sustainable development with emphasis on small and micro enterprises, local communities, youth and women. A multi-sector stakeholder approach involves working with multitudes of partners with different objectives for the country. While having many partnerships benefits Seychelles, it also brings about significant challenges. Aligning our different objectives and having a clearly defined strategic framework will ensure shared vision and well-defined targets in line with the country's development. An excellent example is the strategic partnership framework signed in August 2018 between the United Nations and my country. The United Nations country team retreat of April 2019 agreed to extend this coordinated approach to other partners in order to better achieve the country's development. These are not limited to international partners, but also to domestic private sector and civil society partners. A smart multi-stakeholder approach is critical for a more effective implementation of Agenda 2030. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank His Excellency, my brother, President Danny Faure of the Republic of Seychelles. The next speaker would be Her Excellency Salome Zorabishvili, President of Georgia. Sorry, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished guests. It's my honor to address the first Sustainable Development Goals Summit today. As a global community, we all agreed to achieve very ambitious goals by 2030, from eradicating poverty to climate change. In the 4 years since the adoption of SDGs, we see some progress, we see challenges, and now it's time for adjustment and acceleration. We are gathered at this summit to reflect on achievements and underperformance, jointly identify and share solutions. Forming sustainable partnerships proved to be a challenge. Yes, governments, NGOs, international organizations, and donors have developed a long-standing cooperation. However, we do not see much of the engagement of private sector, moreover of ordinary people. There are numerous solutions out there. We need to diverge from business as usual and employ new ways of working and try to address these social and economic issues with innovative and inclusive business models. For sustainable global growth, partnerships need to combine not only financial but human resources as well. Projects and programs must carry both social and economic value. This is why Georgia attaches exceptional attention to the achievement of SDG 4 and SDG 8. The government took a commitment to double its share in financing of education up to 6% of the country's GDP by 2022. Vocational education and training is a field where Georgia is actively pursuing public-private partnership, encouraging employers' vested interest in improving professional skills of workers. To ensure inclusiveness, all of the achievements and benefits of the Georgian state should be accessible and enjoyed by our compatriots in the occupied Abkhazia and Skhin Valley regions. This is where we need the active engagement of our allies, especially the UN and bilateral partners. On a larger scale, I believe the innovative financing is critically important for bridging the $37 trillion US gap for the 2030 agenda and for moving SDG funding from billions to trillions. Following France's successful experience of UNITAID model, we see expanding innovative financing platforms supported by different countries, UN, World Bank, OECD, Islamic Bank, and other partners. These initiatives range from solidarity taxes and social impact investments to pilot initiatives of blockchain technologies and even cryptocurrencies. Georgia is proud to have served as the president of the leading group on innovative financing. Together with France and Japan, we are ready to work within UN on promotion and institutionalizing the coordination of innovative financing initiatives. In conclusion, let me reiterate that though each country individually makes efforts, joining forces is still the main channel for acceleration and effectiveness of the 2030 Agenda implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The next speaker on our list would be His Excellency, the President of the Republic.
Dear Mr. President, dear Mrs. President, Excellencies, distinguished audience, I have the honor to participate at this high-level political forum on sustainable development and to make a review of the efforts that the Republic of Moldova applies for the implementation of its goals. I acknowledge I only have 3 minutes to speak, so I will be as laconic as possible. Briefly, on the 14th of December 2018, the Parliament of the Republic of Moldova adopted the basic document on the country's strategic planning, the National Development Strategy, Moldova 2030, which includes 4 key pillars of the sustainable development with 10 long-term corresponding goals. The first pillar refers to the sustainable and inclusive economy and has the goals such as increasing access for people to modern infrastructure, public facilities, and improving living conditions, as well as increasing incomes from sustainable sources and mitigation of economic inequality. The second pillar refers to a robust human and social capital, which provides guarantee of a non-discriminating qualitative education, guarantee of a solid and inclusive social protection system, as well as providing a balance between the labor and family. At the same time, the Moldova 2030 strategy emphasizes improving the efficiency of institutions, this being a pillar that I hope will ensure an efficient governance as well as promote a peaceful and secure society. The fourth pillar of the strategy is to ensure the fundamental right to a healthy and safe environment for citizens. For each of the 10 priority objectives for the Republic of Moldova, we have analyzed the current situation, highlighted the most vulnerable groups in our society, analyzed the basic factors of people's vulnerability, and formulated the strategic vision. We have also set and stipulated specific objectives and priority actions, described the expected impact, and finally, yet importantly, set the indicators and targets for monitoring and evaluation. Dear friends, achieving these ambitious goals for my country is only possible after implementation of key reforms. You probably know that in June earlier this year, the Republic of Moldova managed to get rid of an authoritarian oligarchic regime which had managed to control the entire vertical of state power. This victory was possible exclusively due to the existence of a consensus inside between the democratic forces in the country, as well as due to a consensus between the major geopolitical actors regarding the Republic of Moldova. As a result, the Republic of Moldova is governed now by a coalition which, for the first time since the declaration of our independence, has united political parties with diametrically opposed views. In fact, the national interest has prevailed over geopolitical dissensions, and 80% of our population strongly support this change. Therefore, we have an ambitious agenda of internal reforms which are supposed to restore the confidence of the population in the judicial system and in the national democratic institutions of our country. Finally, yet importantly, let me refer to the essential problem of the Republic of Moldova. In my opinion, this is the definitive political solution of the territorial conflict known as the Transnistrian conflict. As the president of the country, I am very much hopeful that the results which we will have obtained after the full implementation of the Sustainable Development Objectives of the Republic of Moldova, will also be benefic for the residents of the left bank of the river Dniester, which unfortunately still separates my country. I am more than sure that at present the Republic of Moldova has a unique opportunity to take full advantage of the internal political consensus, but especially the consensus reached between the main foreign actors, the Russian Federation, USA and EU, to settle peacefully and definitely this conflict in the east of my country. These are the elements which I wanted to highlight for you in my brief speech. However, I take this opportunity to reiterate the firm commitment of the Republic of Moldova to make the necessary efforts to achieve fully the national objectives drawn up in accordance with the 2030 agenda. I hope that once we achieve these goals, the Republic of Moldova will become a country whose citizens can be proud of it, and the young generation can fully realize themselves in their homeland next to their parents and friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me remind the representative, those who will take the floor, to kindly observe the time limit. The screens are, in fact, in front of the speakers here. They can see if they are within the 3 minutes. The next on the list would be His Excellency, the President of Romania.
Honorable Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and honor to participate at this Leaders' Dialogue and exchange views, assessments, and good practices about our approach on sustainable development. Romania, my country, ran the presidency of the Council of the European Union in the first semester of this year under the motto, cohesion, a common European value. This presidency was therefore a chance for us to underline the key role of cohesion for achieving the objective of closing economic, social, and territorial gaps among the member states, regions, and citizens of the European Union. This is, in fact, the spirit of the 2030 Agenda and of its Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, let me briefly share with you the main actions my country undertook in support of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Romania translated the principles behind the Sustainable Development Goals into country-specific strategic priorities, objectives, and targets, and embedded them in a reviewed national strategy for sustainable development adopted in 2018. In order to ensure the achievement of sustainable development goals in every domain, the creation of sustainable development units is underway in relevant ministries. To benefit from the input of the civil society, a coalition for sustainable development to include the most active representatives is also being set up. For monitoring the progress of implementation of the 2030 Agenda, a new set of sustainable development indicators are considered by the Romanian National Institute for Statistics. In order to stimulate the business engagement for the Sustainable Development Goals, Romanian authorities initiated partnerships with the Romanian business community. Efforts are on the way for launching a sustainability code in partnership with representatives of the private sector dedicated to mainstreaming environmental and social policies in the economic activity. Romania has also been very active in promoting partnerships for sustainable development at the regional level. The United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and the OECD supported us in creating a platform for sharing regional experience and fostering meaningful partnerships among countries belonging to the European Union Eastern Europe, Western Balkans, and Central Asia during the regional conference on the 2030 Agenda, Partnerships for Sustainable Development, hosted in April this year in Bucharest. On that occasion, the participating countries endorsed the Bucharest Declaration, acknowledging the need to accelerate actions in implementing the 2030 Agenda and encouraging the creation of more robust partnerships to overcome the current challenges in achieving the 2030 Agenda. I assure you, dear colleagues, that Romania will boost its efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, with the desire to ensure that both current and future generations can live in a sustainable world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The next speaker on the list is His Excellency, the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. You have the floor, sir.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored to represent the Czech Republic at the summit and express our commitment to the 2030 Agenda. In the latest SDG index, my country, Czech Republic, ranked as the #7 most developed country. Yes, #7, great achievement for our country. Yet we face also many challenges. To step up our efforts, we pledge today on the occasion of the SDG Summit 3 new voluntary commitments. First, we will reduce our carbon footprint by planting 10 million trees in urban and rural landscape until 2025. Second, we will enhance stakeholders' involvement through a new online voluntary commitment platform. Third, we will improve impact assessment mechanisms to take into account sustainability. To leave no one behind is the central promise of the 2030 Agenda. Without openness, transparency, and broad engagement of civil society and other stakeholders, we will never succeed. This is the approach we took when writing the strategic framework, Czech Republic 2030, the main platform for the SDGs implementation at the national level. Good governance, participation, and rule of law are the key elements for increasing public trust. The cornerstone of international partnership is multilateralism. We need effective and inclusive international institutions in order to deliver on the SDGs. We have to work together to preserve and strengthen the rules-based international order. SDGs represent great business opportunities. We need to strengthen the cooperation with the business sector and engagement of private finance in the 2030 Agenda implementation. Business sector drives technological innovations and prosperity. International trade has to be the engine of sustainable development. To sum up, we need to ensure a broad and active participation of all stakeholders in the 2030 Agenda implementation and its follow-up mechanism. We can make it, but only together. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, and thank you for keeping the time. The next speaker will be His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Sweden.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is time for delivery on the Sustainable Development Goals. We must succeed in our commitments to end extreme poverty and also to solve the climate crisis. And for this, we need leaders and doers to step up. But individual efforts are not enough. We need to cooperate if we want to have results that are sustainable. Allow me to give 2 concrete examples of such partnerships. First, in 2022, I launched an initiative called the Global Deal, together with the ILO and the OECD, and a core group of countries, enterprises, employers, organizations, and trade unions. The Global Deal aims to promote and strengthen social dialogue. Well-functioning social dialogue is economically smart, and it is also an important tool for generating decent work and reducing inequalities and exclusions, fully in line with SDG number 10. Second, 2 days ago, my colleague, the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, and I launched a new leadership group for industry transition. This group will support and accelerate the transition of heavy industries, which accounts for some 30% of global emissions. So public-private partnerships, innovation, and technology transfer are at the center of this initiative. Beyond these two examples, achieving the SDGs requires focus on gender equality. Gender equality is an explicit goal, SDG number 5, but also a perspective to be included in the implementation of all other goals. I proudly lead a feminist government, emphasizing the rights, the representation, and the resources for all women and girls. I am a he-for-she champion, and I call on all other leaders to join the cause. Because in far too many places, women's and girls' enjoyment of human rights is pushed back. And our response to this will require perseverance and strong partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, the political declaration adopted earlier at this summit calls for individual and collective action. Let us show that our partnership have a real impact in the everyday lives of our citizens. Let us solve our big challenges together. Let us act. Let us deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, and congratulations for the initiatives that you have taken, and especially on gender equality. The next speaker will be His Excellency, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Cabo Verde. Sir.
Obrigado, Senhora Presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Your Excellencies. It is a great pleasure to be part of this important discussion. When in 2015, the international community pledged to achieve the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, it recognized the importance and need for ambitious actions to eradicate poverty and build resilience to environmental degradation, climate change, and other external shocks. However, the progress we have generally made in implementing the agenda and achieving the SDGs is not enough. As a community of nations, we are not on the right track to fulfill the promise of the 2030 agenda. We need to translate the ambitions into concrete action through meaningful and transformative partnerships if we do not want to leave anyone behind. The Global Partnership for Sustainable Development can play a very important role in accessing external financing, capacity building, and technology, which are essential to complement the national effort and to fulfill the 2030 agenda. Cabo Verde is counting on robust and inclusive economic growth driven by foreign and domestic private investments as a condition for the creation of employment and income opportunities. Cabo Verde is counting on the territorialization of the SDGs and their achievement in order not to leave anyone behind. Cabo Verde's development strategy is based on developing human capital, defending human dignity, stability, trusting institutions, good governance, and our country's geostrategic position in the mid-Atlantic, which is an asset for economic and security purposes. Cabo Verde wants to become a high-income country. Our ambition is not limited to remaining as a middle-income country. We wish to graduate to high-income country status. We are committed to achieving good results. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. The next speaker who will be the last one representing member states will be His Excellency the Prime Minister of Madagascar. You have the floor, sir.
Madam, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Madagascar, which I represent here today, is very happy to take part in this dialogue on the 2030 agenda, particularly with regard to the Partnership for Sustainable Development. The SDGs are one of the international agendas to which my country is fully aligned. Madagascar today is moving towards emergence as defined by the visions of His Excellency Mr. André, the President of the Republic. The general policy of the state is based on 13 commitments of the President of the Republic, the main goal of which is to make up the delays in development that Madagascar has had for more than 60 years. The Madagascar's emergency plan 2019-2023 is to transform structurally in terms of dimension, to make this faster, to promote human security, to combat poverty, food insecurity, malnutrition, the unemployment of young people and women, precarious living conditions, criminal acts and insecurity in cities and in the countryside, corruption and inequality, all of this which undermines peace and social justice, human rights, and the responsible government. These are all the things being dealt with by the state. In the context of the 5 years, Madagascar aims to double its energy production, to preserve 100,000 hectares in rice, to build neighborhood schools and hospitals, to promote the entrepreneurship of young people and women, to build 50,000 new houses throughout the country, to build roads and rural pathways and markets in all parts of Madagascar, to have the population benefit from drinking water, sanitation, to preserve the biodiversity, and have reforestation, to make ambitious responses to climate change in the south of the ambitions of Madagascar can attain the SDGs, and we are working to use the approaches in the efficiency for the use of resources. Will use its own forces to mobilize domestic resources. Madagascar also is counting on the solidarity of the international community to achieve a 2030 agenda. Clearly, the global partnership favorizes the development of innovative mechanisms so that together with the traditional and bilateral and multilateral forms of financing through public and private partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, a great deal remains to be done. Partnership will be essential to succeed in attaining our sustainable development. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre.
I thank the Prime Minister.
Speaker would be, and I will give the floor to Mr. John Denton, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Excellency, and thank you very much to all the participants in today's discussion for finding space to enable the private sector to participate in this important debate on what partnerships need to be forged and how to do it better in order to support the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm actually the first Australian to lead the ICC in its 100 years of history. We are a purpose-led organisation. Our whole aim, our whole purpose is to enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity and opportunity for all. We are the institutional voice of 45 million businesses from every single country represented here, from the north and the south, developing, developed world. So when we look at the issue of the SDGs, we look at it through a business eye. What we see is a noble ideal which is potentially transformative, but the failure to actually support the transformation. What we actually need, when I look at it from a business perspective, is how do we enable systems change to enable delivery of the SDG, and there's two things we need to focus on. The first is we need to create an environment where we can actually create massive scale within local businesses and businesses across the world. And the second, to facilitate the reaching of that scale, we need to ensure that policies at a global level are aligned to actually support the SDGs. On the first, we've shown, and I announced during the course of this week, that it is possible to mass mobilize business. We have taken this global challenge, and by crafting a coalition of action amongst chambers of commerce globally, we've been able to mobilize 2,100, moving to 2,200 chambers of commerce globally, which represent the actions then of 10 million businesses. That is a massive mobilization of business at a local level. And what we are doing now, and where we want your help, is to ensure that through partnerships with various agencies here and with countries, we can actually help provide the tools to support those small and medium enterprises, which comprise almost in every single economy the dominant force of business within your economy to actually take up that action on climate change. So we need to craft those partnerships. The second thing, which I said before, was around policy alignment. The challenge at the moment, from our perspective, is that we can't deliver the scale in all the areas we want to support the SDGs because there is incompatible policy frameworks at a global level. We would expect, and I think this is where your leadership is critical, that these are identified and not left untended. These are identified and actually a movement takes place, a campaign to ensure policy frameworks are SDG supportive. We actually have to have that kind of deep thinking about how we crunch through the problems of the dissonance between existing policy frameworks. We see it in terms of the financing for development. We see the misalignment of incentives. We see the misalignment of risk and weighting, which actually is stopping some of the long-term investment which is required to support the delivery of the SDGs. This must stop. The ICC, we stand ready, as I've said earlier today at the Business Forum, as I've said during the course of this week, and as we have said in our declaration for the role of business in the 21st century, we stand ready to lead with you. We compliment you on the decision to actually include the ICC with a permanent seat at the General Assembly of the United Nations because you recognised the wisdom of bringing the private sector in as a force for good to mobilise to deliver the SDGs and, frankly, to deliver on Paris. Without us, it will be more than a stretch. Without us, we may as well stop worrying about it and just move on with what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. We are here for systems change. We are not here for business as usual. We are here for business unusual. And the ICC stands ready to forge partnerships with all who want to participate with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker on the list would be my brother, Mr. Akinwumi Adesina, the President of the African Development Bank. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Madam President, Excellencies, dear friends of a better world. The clock is ticking, and the time is running fast on the SDGs. We're in a race against time to meet the goals. We must now change the pace and the scale of our engagements. The UN Secretary General mentioned to me that the SDGs, for it to succeed globally, they must first succeed in Africa. Africa will not fail on the SDGs. The African Development Bank's high five priorities to light up and empower Africa, to feed Africa, integrate Africa, industrialize Africa, and improve the quality of life of the people of Africa are at the core of accelerating the SDGs for Africa. Over the past 4 years, the bank has helped to connect 16 million people to electricity, provide 70 million people with agricultural technologies to achieve food security, deliver access to finance for 9 million people, and provide 55 million people with access to improve transport, and 31 million people with access to improve water and sanitation. We will not relent. To further tackle climate change, the bank will double its climate financing to $25 billion by 2025. The bank's affirmative finance action for women, called AFAWA, will help to deliver $3 billion in new finance for women. The strong support of President Macron and the G7 leaders in Biarritz helped us to mobilize $251 million for this initiative. When women win, Africa wins. The bank has developed and launched the Desert to Power initiative to develop 10,000 megawatts of solar power to provide 250 million people in the Sahel with electricity via the power of the sun. I am excited that G5 Sahel heads of state and a number of developed countries of the G7 and South-South partnerships will help us to mobilize and achieve this $20 billion investment to create the world's largest solar zone. Through partnerships, the African Union and the African Development Bank launched the African Leaders for Nutrition to raise the level of political engagement to end stunting in Africa. For stunted children today will lead to stunted economies tomorrow. With your support, we'll scale up the Africa Disaster Risk Finance Facility with $250 million to co-pay insurance premiums for low-income countries and deliver $1 billion in payouts for countries by 2030. When leaders arise, challenges are surmounted. Impossibilities give way to possibilities, and the hopes and aspirations of the future are brought forward to today. Let's all arise and deliver the SDGs for Africa. Doing so, we will win on the SDGs globally. Let's win on the SDGs for our generation. Let's leave behind a better world for those coming behind us. Let's lace up our boots and score more development goals. There's still enough time to win. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President of the ADB. I now give the floor to Ms. Sharon Burrow, who is the Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation.
Delegates, the global economic model has failed working people. It's failed working people and their families. The world is 3 times richer than it was just over 20 years ago. Yet 70% of people are denied universal social protection. 84% of people tell us the minimum wage is not enough to live on. 60% of families are living on the edge of despair, and too many people work in dehumanizing exploitation in our supply chains, where 94% of the world's workforce is a hidden workforce for the companies who rely on them for profit. 60% of the world's people are working in informal work. No minimum wage, no rights, no rule of law, without social protection. The global labour force is in trouble and we need your help. You can fix this. The social contract is broken. This is inequality by design, and it's time for Goal 8 to be realised. The world's people need a new social contract, which has the legal backing of a UN treaty for business and human rights, with mandated due diligence, the implementation of the ILO Centenary Declaration, where every worker has the guarantee of a labour protection floor, a floor of rights, minimum wages, living wages, safety and health, maximum hours of work, a social protection floor, and a transformative agenda for women and young people, along with just transition measures for the global shifts of climate action, technology, and the displacement of people. We can do this together. Human and labour rights are the core of a civilised, peaceful and prosperous world. Yet 107 countries deny freedom of association, and 80% deny some or all of workers' collective bargaining rights. When corporate greed or authoritarian governments close democratic space, denying rights to organise and bargain collectively for shared prosperity, they allow exploitation and oppression, and it fuels the age of anger and despair we are living in. SDG 8 recognises that inclusive growth starts with compliance with labour rights. This includes fighting discrimination and inequality that create disadvantage based on disability, age, gender, youth, and the denial of health and education for all. Delegates, it's time for Goal 8. It's time for all 17 goals and the promise that the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement deliver a zero carbon, zero poverty world. That's the promise. Let's make it happen. This is the partnership for sustainable development that we call for, a new social contract. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. That was the last speaker on our list. I think we have had a good contribution. We have heard good contributions both from member states and other stakeholders. We are all aware that time is ticking, that it's indeed time for delivery, and that we need this partnership and a more, coordinated, coherent partnership among us. We have heard many examples that you can take away from each and every speaker. We have seen a deep commitment to the SDGs from what we have heard this afternoon. So with this, we'll come to the end of this session. I thank you all for coming. I hope you have found it fruitful, but nevertheless, this is a good session that will really make us more committed and be aware of the little time that we have in achieving the SDGs. The Leaders' Dialogue 6 on the 2020-2030 vision will begin momentarily in this chamber, so you may remain seated. Thank you very much.
I'm Anna. Let me tell you what the SDGs mean to me. I was born with HIV. When my parents died, my grandmother looked after me. We could not always afford food, but she worked hard to feed us. My grandmother is my hero. She insisted I go to school. I was teased at first, but soon made friends. Today, I'm a nurse and I help others. I wish my parents were alive. They did not have access to HIV medicine. Fortunately, I do. Now, the virus in my body is virtually undetectable, so I cannot pass it on. Meet Leo, my partner. He is HIV negative. He loves and accepts me as I am. And we have been blessed with a daughter, Sophia. I delivered her at my clinic. We just installed solar panels, so we have electricity, clean water, and toilets. Oh, here comes my brother Ben and his partner Luke. They adopted Tina, who's HIV positive. It has not been easy for them to start a family. They had to go to courts to fight stigma and discrimination against them. They are moving to the city where they will be better accepted, have jobs, and good health services. We are happy living in our village by the sea. Life is good. I'm proud. We couldn't have achieved all of this alone without our neighbors, teachers, the government, NGOs, and partners. HIV exists, but it doesn't define me and my family. Let's end AIDS together.
Ya? Ya. Kita mulai. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Head of State and Government, Minister, Excellencies, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order Leaders Dialogue 6 of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, convened under auspices of the General Assembly on the 2020 to 2030 vision. Let me take this opportunity to cordially welcome all of you to this Leader Dialogue. I am honored to serve as your co-moderator, together with His Excellency Carmelo Abela, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Promotion of Malta. Before we proceeded, I would like to make some introductory remarks about the theme of our discussion this afternoon. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is now 4 years since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda. We are encouraged by progress that has been made at a global level. Unfortunately, progress has been slow and uneven. We know the biggest challenges include, from a technical perspective, the lack of availability and quality data, resources mobilization, and from systemic risks such as displacements and migration, conflict, and climate change. Next year, 21 of the 169 SDG targets will come to maturity, including those related to biodiversity and management of natural resources. These targets are also crucial for the implementation of the Paris Agreements and the UN Convention on Biodiversity. Our action regarding this maturing target will determine whether or not we are on track to meet our ambition by 2030. Indonesia's commitment to SDGs remains firm. Indonesia has already mainstreamed the SDGs into the national development planning. We have reached notable achievements, including inclusive and consistent economic growth, near universal education, improved climate action, and disaster management. All these achievements and potential progress ahead will be the foundation of our long-term vision called the Indonesia Vision 2045. That strives to achieve advanced nation status that's underpinned by quality human development, sustainability, sustainable economic growth, even distribution of development, and good governance. Based on Indonesia's own experience, we see three measures that the international community must do in the last decade of SDG implementation. First, we must enable transformational change to accelerate the current rate of progress, changing our mindset that are crucial interlinkage between the goals, and therefore SDGs implementation must be holistic. Second, build stronger a global partnership to leverage all necessary resources. Third, promote a more inclusive approach among all relevant stakeholders. In conclusion, the next 10 years should be clear toward accelerating the achievement of the SDGs. It must start today. On 2020 to 2030 vision should be built on synergies and energy succeeded. I now invite my co-moderator, the Honorable Carmelo Abela, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Promotion of Malta, to make some opening remarks. Please.
Thank you very much, Co-Moderator, Your Excellency. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Global Sustainability Report confirms that we have fallen behind in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Thus, we are left facing a huge challenge in the coming decade to attain the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to step up our efforts to deliver on what was promised in the 10 years to come. In doing so, taking early and sustained action to address existing gaps is critical if we are to translate this ambitious, leave no one behind commitment into action. Although achieving the SDGs might seem like an uphill struggle, we need to consider the progress we have already achieved. At European Union level, for example, we have already embarked on a transition towards a low-carbon economy that is climate neutral, resource efficient and circular, while ensuring social equality and inclusiveness. As EU, we have also put the 2030 Agenda at the heart of our external action, and we have aligned all development activities with it through the new European Consensus on Development, which was agreed upon in June 2017. Given the current levels of globalization and interconnectivity, no single nation state, big or small, can advance sustainably without the collective support of other states. The direction towards success depends on the cooperation of governments, institutions, the private sector, and civil society across different sectors. Malta is an avid supporter of the multilateral approach and believes that better results can be achieved through a collective effort. Notwithstanding, the need to act collectively is not merely of importance to small countries, but should apply to all countries who are striving to achieve the same goals. Finally, we should also take this opportunity to explore what necessary steps and actions must be taken in order to make faster progress towards achieving the SDGs, which will give a secure future to the generations yet to come. I thank you for your kind attention.
Distinguished participant, before calling on the first speaker on the list, may I remind delegation that statements are limited to 3 minutes. To assist speakers in managing their time, a speech timer will be projected on the screen. The clock on the speech timer will start blinking red to indicate that the speaker has 1 minute left to conclude his or her statement. In this regard, delegations are encouraged to submit longer version of their statement to the Secretariat for posting on Paper Smart portal. I appeal to all delegations to strictly observe all time limit in order to allow all inscribed speakers to deliver their statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Engels Levits, President of the Republic of Latvia.
Your Excellency Muhammad Yusuf Kalla, Vice President of Indonesia. Your Excellency Carmelo Abela, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Promotion of Malta. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is said that people tend to overestimate what can be done in 1 year and to underestimate what can be done in 10 years. Today, 4 years after we all agreed on Agenda 2030, we must accurately design the decade of delivery to achieve the SDGs by 2030. That is why I would like to thank the Secretary General and the UN agencies for this summit that allows us to take into account our lessons learned and rethink how we how to achieve the targets. First, as an international community and in our own countries, we should look at the target areas in which we have negative long-term trends, such as inequality of income, reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, etc. Second, we should address the 21 target that mature in 2020 and analyze where and why we are not achieving these targets. Next, we must take critical action in the short and long term to ensure that we reach our targets for 2020 and 2030. In Latvia, our government is in the process of agreeing our next national development plan that will bring us to 2028. We have identified the need to make fundamental changes in the following 4 areas. First, harnessing the potential of climate change policies and the circular economy across sectors. This means reducing greenhouse gas emissions, better managing of our land resources, incentivizing our companies to make more efficient use of resources, etc. Second, we will be steering education and science policy towards the needs of the future economy, improving education, especially in STEM areas, improving competency and workplace-based education, leaving no one behind. This is essential to move Latvia's economy to a knowledge economy. Education and science is also important for reducing income inequality among people and regions. By 2028, we will be improving social inclusion, especially for vulnerable groups, the aged, persons with disabilities, and those displaced by technological changes. Fourth, our next fundamental change is one that I personally think is critical. We aim to increase a sense of trust in our justice and governance system. I also think that many countries will share our belief that improving media and social network literacy is one important key to strengthening critical thinking, democracy, and rule of law. Thank you.
I think the President of Latvia. I think the President of Latvia. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Bapak Mahathir bin Mohamad, Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Your Excellency, Mr. Yusuf Kala, co-moderator, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Malaysia believes in the achievement of sustainable development goal. But between believing in it and achieving it, of course, we know it's not an easy matter. There are many goals to be achieved before we can say that we have reached the goal of becoming sustainably developed. But Malaysia has, from the very beginning of its independence, decided to plan for its future. We began with the 5-year plans. And of course, the 5-year plans were designed in accordance with our own ability to achieve the objectives. We know our assets, we know our weaknesses, and we know that we can achieve certain things if we do things right. And it is in this that Malaysia places its faith in its future. And indeed, we have actually achieved quite a bit of the goals that we have set for ourselves. Now, among the goals, of course, was the eradication of poverty. This is a very important thing. We need to eradicate poverty. But the state of the economy is not static. Over time, the economy grows. And what was regarded as above the poverty line becomes below the poverty line after a period of years have passed. That is because the economy grows. And in a bigger economy where more people are able to earn more, if we use the old poverty line, we will find that everybody is now above the poverty line, and therefore we have eradicated poverty. But in actual fact, because of high cost of living and other factors, although we have reached above the poverty line as determined at the beginning, now the poverty level is actually much higher than the original poverty line that we drew. And when we decide to change the poverty line, then of course we find that there are still a lot of people below the new poverty line. And so it goes on for years and years as the country grows, as the country develops and becomes richer, the poverty line also reaches a higher level, and we still have poverty in our country. I doubt whether it is actually possible to eradicate poverty totally, but we will try. There are other things that we have to focus on. We have today our concern for our environment. We have to keep our environment clean. But as the population grows, the amount of waste produced by the bigger population is normally much more than it was before. As the population grows, we have to spend more money trying to treat the waste that we produce more and more as the time goes by. It is unfortunate that some other countries are helping us increase our waste. They have sent some of their waste to our country. We suddenly discover that the containers supposed to be full of plastic material were actually waste material. And we have a problem now of trying to get rid of this extra waste. It is hope that we look after our own waste and not send them to other countries. It's grossly unfair for some rich countries, for example, to send their waste to poor countries, because it costs us a lot of money to get rid of the waste that is sent to our country. But we ourselves are producing waste, and trying to get rid of the waste becomes very difficult now because there are plastics, and plastics does not degenerate. It does not disappear. It does not dissolve. It remains the same plastic thing even after years and years. You cannot dispose of the plastic by burning because it causes noxious gas to be passed out. And this is dangerous to health and the environment. We cannot throw them into the sea because we now discover that turtles are killing themselves eating plastic sheets. This is a problem that we have to face, and we hope that some scientists might work out some way of destroying plastics. A lot of money needs to be spent on devising ways and means of getting rid of plastics. The others can be recycled. Metal, for example, can be recycled. But as we grow bigger and bigger, and also richer and richer, we produce more waste than ever before. And treating waste, of course, is something that will will leave us still unable to fulfill our desire to have sustainable development. So this is going to be with us for a long time. Our environment, of course, must be looked after, and we are trying our best not to cut down trees. Malaysia, at the meeting in Rio de Janeiro, promised that the whole country must be at least 50% covered by natural forests. And this we have done. We now have 53%, 53 to 55% of the land covered by natural forests. And we intend to keep this. Although we have to derive some benefit or some profit from our forests, but we will be very careful that we will not cause the forests to diminish to an extent that will be bad for our country and, of course, for the rest of the world. For the world expects us to absorb all the carbon dioxide that is produced, to be absorbed by the forests in Malaysia and elsewhere. We'll try to sustain our forests for as long as possible because we feel that this is something that is sustainable and that will help the quality of life of the people in Malaysia. Nevertheless, we will need land over time for human settlement. We cannot say that we should keep people from living in good houses simply because we have no more space for them. So Malaysia today is building high-rise buildings, more high-rise buildings, so that on a per square meter basis, there would be more people able to live and sustain themselves. This is also another way of sustainable development. In the past, of course, we used to cut down the forest in order to build single-storied houses. But now we are building high-rise houses. The highest one that we are building at the moment is 118 floors. And I think that will help us reduce the need for us to clear the forest in order for our people to find living space. But there are other things that is happening, of course, which we have to look after. The supply of food, for example, again needs more land. If we don't have land, we cannot grow all the rice and the other crops that we need for the people, for their needs. But what we have done, of course, is to adopt modern farming in which we grow vegetable not only on the land, but also on tiers of buildings, many tiers of buildings, and they are grown in pots so that they don't occupy too much space. We can build many stories. I'm told that in some countries they have already grown in on 70 stories high building to produce vegetable and other edible plants for their consumption. So again, we are doing this in order to sustain our environment and also provide our people with food. There are many other things that we can do, and of course we don't want to pollute the air around us. We are working on having electric cars and maybe hybrid cars first before electric cars. And in that way, we will stop polluting the air with the exhaust from our petrol-driven cars. There are really many things that Malaysia can do, and in all our plans, we take into consideration the need for sustainable development. And to a certain extent, we have already achieved this, but we need to do a lot more before we can complete all the 17 areas that we have to focus on in order to achieve the goal of the development being sustainable. But definitely Malaysia must develop. Our people need development. And of course they need, for example, good infrastructure. Good infrastructure sometimes will cause some loss in terms of land and the environment, even the forest, because we need to build lakes, dams, etc. And this will force us to cut down some trees or maybe drown some trees so that we can have sufficient water for our people. With regard to electricity, we are, of course, ensuring that the generation of electricity does not pollute the air. Currently, of course, we have a four fuel policy, that of using fuel oil, coal, gas, and water. But we avoid using nuclear power. We don't think we know enough about nuclear material at this point in time. We know how to activate material, uranium or whatever, but having activated this material, we do not know how to reverse the process so that they become harmless. All nuclear material over time will be wasted, but not totally, and the waste has to be dealt with. We cannot easily dispose of the waste. We can, to a certain extent, reverse the process, but mostly we have to find other ways of disposing of the waste. Namely, we need to bury them in safe places deep enough so that the radiation, which can go on for 1 million years, the radiation will not affect the health of our people. We had one experience which was very bad, and that was when we converted the byproduct of tin mining, a material, black material called amang, and that is activated in order to be used as for color TV. But later on, it was found that color TV can be produced with LED light, etc. So they stopped using this material. But this material had already been activated. It is radioactive. So what do we do with the leftover radioactive material? We had a tough time negotiating with a company which produced this radioactive material, and eventually we had to reserve a piece of land 1 square kilometers big and bury deep into the ground, covered with lots of cement in order to prevent radiation. That's the cost of using nuclear material. I really do not think that we know enough about nuclear material at this point in time. We know how to use, how to activate, we know how to use, but then we don't know how to deactivate the nuclear material. But, Mr. Moderator, Malaysia will try its best to achieve a sustainable goal, although we have a need to do certain things which may cause a lot of problems for the environment, but we will try our very best to achieve the goal as set out by these people on sustainable development. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. I thank the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Pak Mahathir. I now give my floor to His Excellency Xavier Espot Zamora, Head of Government of the Principality of Andorra.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malta, Excelencias, señores y señores.
Ladies and gentlemen, a bit more than 10 years before 2030 and the time to achieve the SDGs, it is appropriate to undertake a reconsideration not only of the progress, but also the degree of attainment of the SDGs, but also to recognize that at this point we're not going to achieve what we proposed in 2015. The 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement are one of the best responses possible to the challenges of the world today and should be the guide for all of our political strategies with a view to the long term. To make them a reality depends on that the public administrations and corporations, consumers and civil society promote them jointly at a much faster pace. In this connection, the government of Andorra has just adopted a national strategic plan for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. The goal is to guide in a coordinated way the collective action of all of the sectors in the next 10 years in order to adopt measures that make it possible to produce the planet we want. The strategic plan makes provision for the creation of a open-ended working group where all the parties will work together to achieve the 17 SDGs and its 169 targets, then that they be a reality. For Andorra, a country which is small in terms of size, the only option to achieve a more just and world and a planet that is still habitable in 10 years is multilateralism. And this is why the government of Andorra will welcome the Inter-American Summit in 2020, a challenge which will enable us to step up our actions and to add leadership and commitments to fulfill our goals for 2030. The Andorra is hoping that to serve as the pro tempore secretariat to promote the situation and improve the situation of different communities in a specific and effective way. This is why the theme of the summit is Innovation for Sustainable Development, Goal 2030. We have the resources, ideas, and motivation, and we're prepared to add to this leadership and the commitment benefiting from the forthcoming Ibero-American Summit, which will take place in our country. And in this connection, we will increase consideration of the concept of social sustainability. A specific example of how this can be done would be through the Ibero-American laboratories with citizen participation, an initiative of the Ibero-American Secretary General, which would promote innovation as a driving force for development, very concrete, low-cost projects, and having a positive impact on the lives of individuals. Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a decade with a common vision to solve the great challenges of the planet and to deal with the challenges before mankind. And we must therefore adopt urgent measures in order to ward off the environmental catastrophe. In Andorra, the Parliament has adopted unanimously the law on the energy transition and climate change, which was proposed by the government. This makes provision for the establishment of measures and instruments to achieve a carbon-neutral society, integrating the adaptation to climate change and greater resilience through the promotion of research, systematic observation, and information. Clearly, a great deal of work still remains to be done, but we already have the material conditions to do this. In the next 10 years, the international community must step up its efforts to achieve inclusive, sustainable development with individuals and with the planet. There is no doubt that Andorra will play its role in this work to attain that goal. Thank you.
I thank the head of I thank the head of government of Principality of Andorra. I now give the floor to His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of Union of Comoros.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, heads of delegations, distinguished guests, the delegation of the Union of Comoros, which I have the honor to head up, thanks you for this initiative, paying tribute to the Secretary General for the excellent work that he has achieved in the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals by assiduously seeking to ensure that the 21st century's challenges can be surmounted. You can count upon the Union of the Comoros as both an ally and a partner. The adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030 and 17 goals thereunder without a doubt has been a tremendous success, a success that was crystallized in the agreement vis-a-vis the shared vision and the roadmap, the way to grasp the challenges, to address the challenges, so to overcome poverty, to achieve justice, and to respect the limitations of the world. In our country, this strategy, which we call SDG 2, is that it aligns perfectly, dovetails with the main thrusts of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a strategy, the aim of which is to achieve economic growth, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, as well as financial stability within our country to achieve our development by 2030. It is thus my conviction that our attendance at this high-level event is of paramount importance. We, furthermore, are of the view that civil society needs to play an important role in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. To that end, an awareness-raising campaign at the administrative level, at the mayor's level, has been held throughout our soil over the course of 2017. The establishment of a national follow-up committee is now the next step. A decree bill is being drafted for the establishment of this committee. Distinguished guests, to conclude, in achievement of SDGs at our country, it is incumbent upon us to step up macroeconomic management, to step up our fiscal capacity, settle our accounts, and to ruthlessly combat corruption, which undermines growth, and to promote a favorable private sector growth. The United Nations and other development partners can assist us in this endeavor. It is important that there be contributions to clean energy in other sectors so that the requisite reforms can be initiated to strengthen the business climate. Such initiatives as the one held late this year in Paris enabled my country to make progress. I invite you to join these initiatives. The aim is to improve national development and the development of our country by 2030. Financial markets and international markets can serve as a source of additional financing, external concessional assistance through concessional grants or donations. This remains critical. To summarize, large-scale galvanization requires a robust partnership involving all stakeholders, and this is a partnership is among the main goals. This hinges on a shared feeling of responsibility to surmount shared challenges for the well-being of all. I cherish the hope that today will lead to innovative solutions, a renewed commitment, and a shared roadmap to a global commitment, which was at the source of the United Nations founding. I hope to see success in this for the well-being of all people. Thank you kindly for your attention.
I thank the President of the Union of Comoros. I now invite my co-moderator, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Promotion of Malta, to continue the proceeding of the meeting, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency Vice President of Indonesia, Mohamed Yusuf Kalla. Before we listen to the next speaker, let me remind the representatives to kindly keep to the stipulated time limit of 3 minutes. Now I invite and give the floor to His Excellency Janos Ader, President of Hungary.
Esteemed Mr. Chair, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, is interpretation working? The previous Secretary General and the former President of the World Bank convened a high-level working panel of water, and they prepared their report 2 years ago, in which they pointed out that water was the soul and the spirit of most of the SDGs. It is impossible to imagine any successful breakthrough in sustainability without responsible water management, eradication of poverty, the safety of food supplies, power generation, urban development, public health services, and a predictable economy are all hopeless without successful water management. And in this report of ours, we said that we are seeing unfold the drama of too much water, too little water, and polluted water in front of our eyes. Hungary is impacted by all these three dramas of water. Can we actually prevent greater harm? I'd like to cite a few examples of what Hungary has been doing and is doing to prevent this. The drama of too much water. We know that as a result of climate change, we are seeing more and more adverse weather events. We are seeing record floods on all our rivers, large and small. During the past 200 years, we have built 4,200 kilometers of defensive lines. These do not protect us against extreme floods. On our second largest river, the Tisa, we had to build 12 emergency reservoirs in order to reduce water level by 1 meter. It is only these reservoirs and the dikes that can protect people living on the shores. The drama of too little water. 10% of my country's area is threatened by desertification. In order to prevent greater harm, in the next coming 10 years, we will have to find more financing than what we have been spending on irrigation during the past 50 years. The drama of polluted water. 20 years ago, we were only cleaning 20% of Hungarian wastewater. By today, this is 90%. But this money invested yields returns because the water supply of the people, agriculture or modern industry cannot be imagined without clean water. We can proudly say that the rivers that pass through Hungary leave our country cleaner than they are when they arrive. To prevent the water crisis, this is the issue that preoccupies most of the countries. And these Hungarian examples should perhaps strengthen us in the hope that it is worth working for the same objective for years or for decades. In order to present solutions, in order to share with others best practices, we are organizing the 3rd edition of the Budapest Water Summit in mid-October to prevent the water crisis. Wherever we should be living on Earth, there can be no other objective. Thank you for your respectful attention.
I thank His Excellency Janos Ader, President of Hungary. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Nikol Pashinyan, Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to take part in today's discussion on the trends and challenges impacting the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs set out an ambitious framework for development cooperation with a view to transform societies and achieve sustainable and inclusive economic growth. We live in a world where inequalities continue to grow and tendencies of exclusion continue to rise. Therefore, we need to look into the ways in which we can work together to mitigate the current trends and challenges through positive examples of inclusive processes. Currently, Armenia is in the midst of implementing an ambitious reform agenda aimed at empowering our people, each and everyone, to use their talent and energy and make our society more resilient and prosperous. We strongly believe that no progress could be achieved in a society if the judicial system is not trusted. In the judiciary is not fair, no sustainable development can be achieved, no economic growth can be registered, no investment will flow. And we are now in the process of elaboration on the ways and modalities of reforming our judiciary. Our peaceful Velvet Revolution, which took place in Armenia last year, totally transformed the role of women in the society. Today, we are absolutely convinced that they can bring changes to our country. Hence, we are promoting meaningful participation of women in all aspects of our life. The share of women in business is rising. The proportion of women in high managerial positions is similar to the average figures recorded in the European Union. We have more women in the IT and high-tech sector than the global average. Today, we have a large participation of women in our parliament in top positions of our government. The revolutions, as it is generally believed, sometimes have negative effects on business. Nevertheless, last year our economy did not show any sign of weakness. On the contrary, our GDP registered 5.2% growth in 2018. Our financial system has been absolutely stable. Our national currency also remained stable despite the devaluation of almost all regional currencies during the last year. In the first half of 2018, the volume of the foreign investments to Armenia has grown up to 26%. And last but not least, we have increased the income part of our budget by 25% due to the drastic measures taken by our government in the fight against shadow economy. We are now reforming our tax system to make business operations in Armenia even smoother. We are taking steps to become an industrial country and transform our economy from mining to high-tech. Tourism is yet another important accelerator of our economic advancement. In particular, we focus on cultural, ecological, and medical tourism. In our policies of economic advancement, we focus on human capital. We place high priority on empowerment and capacity building of our youth, providing digital technology training. One of the important achievements in this field is the TUMO Center for Creative Technologies, where thousands of Armenian teens have the opportunity to learn new technologies. The center started out in Yerevan and has already expanded to a number of other countries. The integration of economic and environmental policies is an important issue for Armenia. Unfortunately, we are already facing the negative impact of the climate change, having registered a 1.3 degrees Celsius average temperature increase, which makes us the fourth most vulnerable country in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia. To address this problem, we have been working to develop an innovative climate finance mechanism, which is part of Armenia's national pledge for the Climate Action Summit of the Secretary General. We put high priority on the cooperation with the United Nations Development System for the advancement of smart development. This process is currently complemented by the launch of an ambitious transformation strategy of Armenia 2015, consistent of 16 mega goals. We still have a lot to achieve. We have to overcome a tangible degree of poverty in our country. We still have to transform our economy to technological and advanced and environmentally friendly industry. The Sustainable Development Goals are designed to promote the values of human dignity, equality, and democracy. And our aim is to revive and strengthen those human-centered values. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Nikol Pashinyan, Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Pumzile Mlambo Nchuka, Executive Director of UN Women.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the 2030 Agenda, we committed to protect human rights, achieve gender equality, and ensure no one is left behind. We have only a decade left to take bold action for people and planet. If we do not act, we risk losing the important gains we have made so far, and we jeopardize the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We already know that of the 21 targets of the 2030 Agenda that are due in 2020, we will not meet. They relate to oceans and youth employment and access to ICTs and mobilizing funds for climate action. This is a serious setback and a collective failure to live up to our commitments. We need member states at the national level and through global intergovernmental processes to take the responsibility to tackle this challenge with urgent measures. For transformative change to happen, leaders must take action and address discriminatory laws and policies that must be repealed and revised. Our institutions must be effective and ensure that those in power are accountable to the people. Economic and social policies must reinforce each other through sustainable growth that strengthens national capacities to invest in social protection and safeguard the environment in order to strengthen livelihoods and resilience. We must leverage science, technology, and innovation for the entire 2030 Agenda, strengthen the science policy interface, and address potential trade-offs. National and global financial systems must address the concentration of wealth, put an end to subsidies for fossil fuels, and significantly reduce military spending and invest in people and the planet. And we must broaden safeguards and safeguard the space for civil society so that they can participate fully in decisions on the pressing sustainable development priorities for their countries. Only through multilateral and collaborative processes can we respond to the global challenges we face. The The women and the young people of today are expecting nothing less from us. I thank you.
I thank the Executive Director of UN Women for her statement. I now give the floor to Mr. José Vieira, Chief Executive Officer of the World Blind Union.
Excellencies, I stand here before you representing persons with disabilities and other marginalized communities, and I wish to share our vision. We believe that the 2030 Agenda can create a planet for every person, including those most marginalized and left behind, where we are recognized as equal citizens in every country with full rights on an equal basis with others, with dignity, respect, and freedom. We have started taking steps towards achieving the SDGs, but to fully realize them, we need urgent actions, partnerships, and strong political will. The first step should be to ensure meaningful inclusion as we continue to face physical, legal, and institutional barriers to participate in society. Development is not sustainable if it is not for all fair and inclusive. We are now calling on world leaders to take immediate actions and concrete measures by putting human rights at the center of policy making and ensuring full and equal participation of marginalized groups in all aspects and levels of the SDGs implementation. Aligning national-level fiscal policies with human rights obligations and calling for system-wide resource allocation and commitments on increased spending for those most left behind, allocating sufficient resources and strengthening capacity to collect, analyze, and disaggregate data by sex, age, disability, and other groups to shift to evidence-based policy making and reporting. We believe that accessibility and inclusion is another key component of promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. Last but not least, an urgent call on world leaders to uphold the commitments made in the Paris Agreement, because climate change is a common concern for all and requires immediate action and all our attention. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by emphasizing that the multilateralism is key to this vision and to build a just, peaceful, prosperous, inclusive, and world for all. We believe that the Agenda 2030 has the potential to revitalize the multilateralism, but we need governments, international agencies to make sure that we are all included. Let me finalize my remarks by saying that only together we will deliver a world for all, with people and the planet. Thank you very much.
I thank the Chief Executive Officer of the World Blind Union for his statement. We have heard the last speaker in Leaders Dialogue 6 on the 2020-2030 vision. I would like to thank all participants for their forward-looking and results-oriented interventions and for their cooperation and goodwill. At this point, I would like to make some closing remarks concerning our deliberations. In this session, we focused on our vision for the next 10 years. 4 years after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, we are not on track to achieve the SDGs. Most 2020 targets are unlikely to be met. In the coming year, we must continue our discussions in relevant intergovernmental spaces to reflect on the way forward for these targets. The GSDR scientists have given us hope that it is still possible to achieve human well-being and eradicate poverty for all people. This, however, will require a fundamental and urgent change in the relationship between people and nature and a significant reduction in social and gender inequalities between and inside countries. As we enter the decade of delivery, we must raise our ambition and step up our efforts to reach those who are the furthest behind. Science must inform our development policies, incentives, and actions. We must pursue a risk-informed and resilient 2030 agenda to ensure natural disasters don't reverse SDG progress in climate-affected countries. We must build on the inclusive multilateralism that led to the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We need to mobilize the entire government at all levels around the SDGs, and we need a whole-of-society approach to put people at the center of multilateralism. We have thus concluded Leaders' Dialogue 6. The second plenary segment of the high-level political forum will begin momentarily. Please remain seated. The meeting is adjourned. Your Excellency, thank you very much.
And we are affected by all the goals, from reducing poverty to the issue of economic growth, to the issue of women's empowerment.
And the Sustainable Development Goal is very much related, and it's very much important for us to reduce the inequalities that indigenous people, including persons with disabilities, are facing. That the whole Sustainable Development Goal should be focused that no one will be left behind, and it's also that nothing about us without us.
One of the sustainable goals for our tribal community that the United Nations supports is global education. Education, period, is very important to indigenous people. But for us, implementing and finding new strategies and mechanisms to use as education by using our culture can help to sustain global peace and conflict resolution.
But the access to education for indigenous peoples, not just access to the appropriate and culturally relevant education in the public system, but also access to indigenous education.
Necesitamos un desarrollo integral, ya que contamos con mucha desnutrición. La salud de la mujer, la educación de la mujer está descuidada por ser mujer indígena y por ser mujer pobre.
Achieving equality is very important to address the issue of discrimination and marginalization, but also in terms of recognizing the contributions of indigenous peoples in sustainable development.
From the indigenous perspective, the indigenous world, I would certainly take a look at good health and well-being. It is really the essence of being connected to your lands, languages, your culture, physical well-being, the emotional well-being, the spiritual well-being.
Los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible son muy importantes en el sentido de que representan un marco general para que los gobiernos, conjuntamente con todas las instituciones de la iniciativa privada y todos los actores de sociedad civil, puedan implementar programas y proyectos en beneficio de las poblaciones indígenas, particularmente para luchar contra la pobreza, las desigualdades y las injusticias.
Entonces queremos hablar al mundo para que nuestra gente no sea juzgada y que tengamos los derechos que toda persona necesita tener.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I call to order the second plenary session of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development under the auspices of the General Assembly. Before asking the first speaker to take the floor, I would like to remind delegations that you must limit your statements to 3 minutes to assist speakers in managing their time. On this, there will be a speech timer on the screen. The clock will begin, starting and blinking in red to indicate that the speaker has 1 minute left to conclude his or her statement. In this regard, delegations are encouraged to submit longer versions of their statements to the Secretariat for posting on the PaperSmart portal. I appeal to all delegations to strictly observe the time limits in order to allow all inscribed speakers to deliver their statements. Having said that, I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. José Borreke Bainimarama, Prime Minister of the Republic of Fiji.
En nombre de los pequeños estados.
Speaking on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States.
Thank you.
Mr. President, across the Pacific, the noble aims of the the noble aims of the 2030 Agenda are becoming more ingrained in government priorities and in the hearts and minds of our citizens. This is helping to drive societal shifts and generational momentum in pursuit of sustainable development. Mr. President, a record number of Pacific small island development states presented their voluntary national reviews in July, including Vanuatu, which completed the first globally peer-reviewed voluntary national review in our region, and more will do so in 2020. Our progress is trackable, and it is transforming the well-being of Pacific people in health, in sanitation, in education, gender equity, and economic development. But gaps remain. NCDs remain a life-threatening issue for far too many of our people, and domestic violence remains a plague within our societies. In Fiji, we've achieved straight 10 years of economic growth, which has funded a vastly expanded societal safety net. We've introduced inclusive policies such as extended maternity leave, family care leave, and paternity leave. Education is free. For low-income Fijians, we provide over 140 free medicines. We provide free water. We subsidize electricity, and we provide new mothers with $1,000 upon birth of a child. We also go the extra mile in ensuring that the elderly and those living with disabilities can work, can travel, and live with dignity. Being in Fiji, driving this progress forward is always where I'd rather spend my time, but doing so would require me to shut my eyes and ears to the hardship our people will face, and do face, as a result of climate change. The reality is that every Pacific nation is put at risk by the possibility of a single severe weather event, sending us tumbling back to square one. And we can't give our children an education when the community is going underwater. We can't sustain our fisheries when our reefs are disappearing. And we can't feed our people when farmland is choked by salination, flooding, and droughts. That is why we must remain on the front lines of the global campaign for climate action and keep up our fierce advocacy for greater means to fund resilient development. The international community must step up on its ODA commitments and the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund. And we must be sure that the nation's vulnerability and fragility in the face of climate change and natural disasters are priority factors for financing decisions. Mr. President, we support the UN reforms to better assist Pacific nations to implement the SDGs more efficiently, which includes the establishment of a multi-country office in the Northern Pacific. We are moving forward in our sustainable development journey, and we see the challenges ahead. Let's hope that the words "leave no one behind" are more than a mantra, but that they will guide decision-making and remain at the heart of the actions we take. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Fiji. I now give the floor to His Excellency Charlotte Slavoj Tabimasmas, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Vanuatu, speaking on behalf of the Pacific Islands Forum.
I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Pacific Island Forum members. The Pacific region is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world, and I wish to share our progress and hopes on sustainable and resilient development. Overall, the Pacific has made a good start in embedding the SDGs and the Summer Pathway and Paris Agreement into our national and regional development agenda. There are 9 Pacific Island countries that have completed their voluntary national reviews on the SDG, including the first ever review completed globally of AVNR for Vanuatu. There are 4 more Pacific countries to report in 2020. Our Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development guide and coordinate regional support to our countries to implement and report on the SDGs and other global commitments. In addition, our first quadrennial Pacific Sustainable Development Report has helped to streamline the region's global reporting, complement and reduce the reporting burden on our small administrations for the 5 high-level summits this week. We have regional and national policies to help build our resilience and empower vulnerable groups such as women and persons with disabilities, but financing and implementation remains challenging. Encouragingly, there has been positive economic growth and good results in maternal and child health and access to education. Our region has reached 80% of the global SDGs target on marine conservation, and we are receiving increased revenue through our fisheries, tourism, and remittance. Importantly, we have successfully mobilized $1.5 billion for the Green Climate Fund. Despite this progress, our development challenges are daunting. Our climate and ocean are warming, our sea levels are rising at twice the global average, and our corals are dying. Disasters, in particular cyclones, flooding, and droughts, have increased in intensity. One catastrophic event is undoing decades of progress, claiming lives, destroying vital infrastructures, homes, biodiversity, and adversely affect food and water security and our economies. This is witnessed by the Category 5 cyclones Pam, Winston, and Gita, caused 64%, 30%, and 38% of GDP losses in Vanuatu, Fiji, and Tonga, respectively. Inequality is rising, with an estimated 1 in 4 Pacific Islanders living below national poverty lines. Unemployment is high, with youth unemployment in the Pacific double the global average. Gender inequality is reflected in the high prevalence rates of violence against women, with up to 60% of our women experiencing violence over their lifetimes. The Pacific region has an NCDs crisis with some highest global rates of NCDs, accounting for up to 80% of deaths. 7 out of 10 countries in the world with the highest rates of diabetes are in the Pacific. In conclusion, we are committed to enhance opportunities for women, youth, and persons with disabilities, enhancing sustainable tourism and fisheries, while conserving our rich biodiversity, tackling NCDs, and dual threats of climate change and disasters more effectively. We call on the UN member states, UN system, and development partners to assist us by agreeing to meet or exceed nationally determined contribution to reduce global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, for the UN Secretary General to urgently appoint a special advisor on climate change and security, and for the G7 and the G20 members to rapidly implement commitments to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies and to mobilize and better utilize existing financing, strengthen our capacities, systems, institutions, and partnership, and increase investment in our statistical systems. And finally, to rapidly accelerate transformational and innovation, including access to green and carbon neutral technology, trade, and ICT. Our Pacific people are being left behind. We must act now. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the Prime Minister of Vanuatu, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Jean-Baptiste Lemoine, Minister of State attached to the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, speaking on behalf of the Group of Seven.
Merci beaucoup, Président.
Thank you very much, sir. We clearly find ourselves at a turning point vis-a-vis implementation of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. In 2015, we all committed to this, and now, 4 years later, it is evident that we have not achieved enough progress, even though we have achieved progress. This is the observation that has been made by the Secretary General and President of the 74th session of the General Assembly yesterday on the basis of the latest global report on sustainable development. And I welcome the work of eminent scientists who've called upon us to transform our approach for sustainable development. So, dear friends, we do not have a choice. We need to accelerate the in-depth transformation of our development model, redoubling efforts to deal with cross-cutting issues in inequality of origin, specifically focusing on equality between men and women. And I welcome the Vice President Issa Tutu for her commitment to women's empowerment. And it is necessary for all of us to facilitate access to education, to health care, to food security, to deal with environmental inequality, to step up our initiatives for the climate, to combat social inequalities, of course, and to continue to indefatigably work to achieve peace and crisis prevention. We are in 2019. 11 years before 2030. This is a unique moment together to rekindle our commitment, and G7 countries who represent 40% of the global wealth, 10% of the global population, it is incumbent upon them above all to ensure that their own public policies align with the Sustainable Development Goals. Since 2009, the G7 countries, the G7 has sought to each year take stock of achievement of these goals. We are accountable, and I wish, for example, to mention the 32 million people saved by the fund to combat tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS. 32 million people. I welcome the Muskoka initiative on women's and infants' health and the Aquila initiative on food security and the Global Partnership for Education. These are all initiatives and institutions set up by the G7. They attest to the importance of collective investment, multilateral investment to achieve these important results. G7 countries shoulder responsibility together. They provide 3/4 of official development assistance. That is $114 billion in 2018. We needed to set clear rules for this assistance. For this assistance, the ODA to be aligned with international standards. For example, to prohibit financing of projects that are not climate compatible. France, during its presidency of the G7, has made the fight against global inequality a priority. We have brought together our African partners, a number of countries, and, of course, civil society in Biarritz. Remember the name of this city, which is a milestone city. We have achieved tangible results because the president did not wish to merely have communiques with inclusive as words, but we've renewed our partnership with Africa. The Sahel Alliance has been strengthened with the inclusion of Canada and Japan. The G7 has delivered support for the AFAWA program of the African Development Bank to support entrepreneurship for women in Africa, and a promotion of gender equality was placed at the heart of G7 priorities with the adoption of the Biarritz Law, a partnership on laws favorable to women, the launch of the Mukwege Fund for victims of sexual conflict-related sexual violence, and adoption of the Priority for Equality initiative. These are tangible responses to environmental challenges. Through the Amazon Alliance Against Deforestation, the METS chart for protection of biodiversity, and the reconstitution of the Green Fund for the Environment will be achieved on 24-25 October next in Paris. Of course, not to mention other important measures to replenish the Global Fund against AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. We have a commitment. This is of utmost importance, within which we are doing everything possible to strengthen the contribution of partners. It is incumbent upon us to be a standard bearer. We have adopted a national roadmap on implementation of the SDGs several days ago. This will all be crystallized in a draft law on a development plan. We are all developing a country seeking to achieve sustainable development, and the time is ticking. Either we act together, either we succeed together. Naturally, there is no question of failure. So let us move forward together. Let us achieve these results for 2030. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of State of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. El Saad Atmani, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Morocco.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Mr. President, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda in 2015 represented a historic event in our collective efforts to face the challenges of sustainable development. The Kingdom of Morocco has preemptively, voluntarily, and effectively participated in all efforts to achieve coherence and harmony between our policies and our international commitments. Our commitment is the strongest. We have the proper constitutional and political frameworks for that. And for 6 years, we have applied all our efforts in this regard and have recently established a governance protocol to achieve this harmony under the auspices of the head of government in political and social policies. We have concentrated on the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them, particularly reducing infant mortality, combating poverty, allowing access to healthcare and social services, improving the infrastructure, promoting rights and freedoms in a genuine democratic environment, and have achieved great success in this regard. In the field of sustainable development, we have adopted our national initiative for sustainable development since 2018, with a view to providing assistance to vulnerable groups and providing proper education. We have adopted an energy renewable resource program aiming at achieving a percentage of 42% by 2030 and 58% by 2040. We have also doubled our efforts in improving the levels of education, and in order to give the proper momentum to our efforts, His Majesty King Mohammed VI has directed us to focus on the human being in political, economic, and social terms, with particular focus on promoting United Nations efforts for sustainable development in Africa. And I would like to seize the opportunity to pledge to you our readiness to share our experiences with our African brothers. Thank you very much. Peace be upon you all.
Gracias al señor
I thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Morocco. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mistati Touré, the Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is a great pleasure for me to address this high-level forum on the Agenda 2030. The Gambia actively participated in the formulation of the 2030 Agenda and was among the 19 African countries selected for the UNDG-assisted inclusive national consultations. The national consultations was facilitated by a national task force of government, UN agencies, private sector, and civil society representatives, and involved focus group discussions with the private sector, youth and women, and other key stakeholders. Following the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, the Gambia moved quickly to launch the agenda at the national level through a development forum on the theme, Post-2015 Agenda and its financing at the local level. A key objective of this launching workshop was to recommend options for mainstreaming the 2030 Agenda into the development planning process and identify the most viable options for financing SDGs in the Gambia, including public-private partnership and private sector financing. In December 2016, Gambians went to the polls and elected a new government. The change in government came with renewed and increased expectations on the part of the citizenry. To this expectation, the new government formulated a National Development Plan 2018 to 2021. The National Development Plan mainstreams the SDGs. The Gambia government continues to engage stakeholders such as the private sector, non-governmental organizations, civil society, and the media to enhance institutions and citizens' awareness and involvement at all levels. These engagements have enhanced participation and ownership of SDGs and will contribute to the effective implementation and attainment of the SDGs. Mr. President, in order to succeed in attaining the SDGs, we must ensure that no one is left behind. In this connection, the Gambia recognizes the critical role of investing in people and reducing the gaps through the creation of opportunities. This is amply exemplified in the National Development Plan priority of investing in our people through improved education and health services and building a caring society. The Gambia government is prioritizing and boosting investment in building the requisite human capital for improved living standards and to power the economy. Our strategies and interventions are also aimed at reducing the gaps that exist between the urban and rural areas. In this regard, we are scaling up our investments in rural roads to help improve access to markets and socio-economic facilities for some of the most vulnerable populations in the country. The construction methods and models are creating employment opportunities for rural communities, especially women. While the government is accelerating the pace of rural electrification, it has also embarked on an ambitious project to provide electricity to schools and health centers in rural parts of the Gambia that currently have limited access to electricity. This environmentally friendly solar PV intervention will help to improve the quality of education and health in the rural areas. Countries must appreciate the social protection that social protection is vital in helping the most vulnerable in society, bridging the gap between the poor and the rich, and giving socio-economic opportunities. The Gambia is implementing a major social protection program which aims to improve the coordination of social assistance activities as well as increase inclusion of the extreme poor, including through cash transfers to the eligible extreme poor. The Gambia will be presenting its voluntary national review in 2020. This will accord the opportunity to document progress registered towards the attainment of the SDGs and the challenges encountered. In conclusion, Mr. President, We will continue to enhance stakeholder engagement in the implementation of the SDGs and their participation in the voluntary national review process. I thank you all.
Doy las gracias.
I thank Her Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Elijah of the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovakia.
Dear colleagues, it's a great honor for me to be here. We are now 4 years in on the SDGs. We all remember the sense of accomplishment and waves of optimism after their adoption. And in those 4 years since, much has been done to make them a reality. The General Assembly has been working with great enthusiasm, leading important initiatives. On the national level, we have seen dozens of states presenting national implementation plans. We have seen whole countries, local communities, and many individuals taking conscious steps every day to live in a sustainable manner and help to move the SDGs forward. It seems like everywhere, everyone is on board with SDGs. 4 years in, nobody is asking why. We already answered all those questions. It's the how we are trying to figure out now, which is an accomplishment and a headache at the same time. We have a great plan, great vision, and many dedicated people working to make it happen. But somehow our efforts do not always match the results. We need to step up. On the question how, I want to make 3 main points. The first concerns partnerships. We simply lack capacities to responsibly approach every economic, social, and environmental consideration. It is important to team up. In Slovakia, for example, we are working hard to create and implement a consensual vision of the Slovakia 2030 and modernize our development cooperation. We are partnering with the UNDP to create enabling environment to involve private sector in the sustainable development activities. We are cooperating with NGO platforms, including on steps encouraging every segment of our society to adopt sustainable production and consumption habits. Partnerships are what makes development sustainable, especially when no partner, including our youth, is left out and everybody feels the ownership. But even with the best policies and most beneficial partnerships, the harsh truth is traditional approaches will not be enough. This goes for the financing, which we'll be discussing separately at the high-level dialogue. During our presidency, the 72nd General Assembly took great steps to make progress on the issue. Governments, private sector, or civil society came together with innovative conceptions, which is exactly what we need now. New ideas, smart solutions. And we need to take them beyond the gates of the United Nations, and that's the second point I want to make. Slovakia is trying to do the job at home, but also on bigger platforms. While presiding the Council of the European Union in 2016, Slovakia spearheaded the establishment of the European Fund on Sustainable Development, grant initiative intended to trigger up to 44 billion euro of investment. In 2019, Slovakia presided over OECD, which we dedicated to harnessing digital transformation for sustainable development. And also as the current chair of the OSCE, we see how supporting states in efforts from protecting the energy infrastructure to promoting good governance are steps towards achieving the 17 SDGs. And this brings me to my last point. Slovakia, as a small country in the heart of Europe, would never be able to pursue and move these issues alone. Our voice would not be loud enough and our resources would not be deep enough. So the third point I want to mention concerns multilateralism. Multilateralism is how we came up with the SDGs. Multilateralism is how we put them on paper. And multilateralism is how we can make them real. SDGs are the most vivid example of what we can achieve working multilaterally. And they are the main argument to advocate for multilateralism. Especially in times it is put under pressure. United Nations must be at the center of this effort. And Slovakia will continue to look at the UN for setting examples that guide our own path. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovakia. I thank him for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Eduardo Rodriguez Barrio, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba. Mr. President, distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished delegates, Ladies and gentlemen, 4 years have elapsed since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. However, the prevailing international order continues to be unjust, unequal, and exclusive. For 40 consecutive years, developed countries have failed to meet their official development assistance commitments. Unsustainable patterns of production and consumption linger on, leading the world to the imminent destruction of the planet. Contrary to what was endorsed in the 2030 Agenda, the world faces an international system in which wars of conquest and unconventional wars Mr. President, for almost 6 decades, Cuba has been a victim of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba, which constitutes the main obstacle to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In recent months, this illegal policy, this harmful policy, has been brutally intensified with the full implementation of the Helms-Burton Act and other measures of economic pressure and piracy applied to paralyze Cuba's economic development and cause hunger and despair among its population in order to obtain political concessions. They have reached the point of persecution, surveillance, and the imposition of sanctions against companies that transport and supply and transport fuel to Cuba in recent months. In addition, the U.S. government is attempting to thwart the South-South cooperation projects between Cuba and countless countries to improve the health conditions of millions of people. This interference negatively affects the countries benefiting from this medical cooperation, directly undermining the 2030 Agenda. Mr. President, despite Cuba moves forward with determination in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, thanks to the efforts carried out by the Cuban socialist state. Our country boasts social indicators comparable to those of many developments. Thus, for example, Cuba is the 5th country among the top 14 countries that have managed to reduce the rate of hunger and malnutrition in a sustained manner for several years, according to the 2018 Global Food Policy Report. In 2017, we achieved the lowest infant mortality rate in our history and in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, at 4 per 1,000 live births. Mr. President, there is an urgent need to count the real political will of all states, especially the developed ones. Let us change the existing unjust international order that benefits a few over and above many others. As the historical leader of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro, expressed, and I quote, "End the philosophy of war." Thank you. I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Cuba for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Ruslan Edevgerev, the Minister, Special Envoy of the President of the Russian Federation.
Distinguished Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt that the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals is impossible exclusively through the efforts of states. What is becoming all the important are the means from the private sector, philanthropic organizations, and civil society. Representatives of these sectors make not only financial but also substantive contributions to achievement of the SDGs. Russia fully accounts for the provisions of Agenda 2030 in setting out our development strategy for the period up until 2024. Pursuant to a decree of our President, Mr. Vladimir Putin, 12 priority national projects are being implemented in all key areas for achievement of sustainable development. Under the global partnership, Russia is proactively delivering assistance to countries in need of such support, both bilaterally and through international organizations. In 2018, the Russian government allocated $1.3 billion $36 million to that end. We attribute great significance to the climate. Presently, a growing number of Russian companies are transforming their businesses to account for the principles of environmentally responsible entrepreneurship, including major branches of the fuel and energy sector and the natural resource extraction sector. On the environmental track, there is active development of the international partnership to achieve the SDGs locally. For example, the cities Moscow and Rostov-on-Don are within the C40 climate leadership group. A second major Russian city, St. Petersburg, has developed its own climate strategy. At the high-level political forum under the aegis of ECOSOC in 2020, we shall present our first national overview of progress and achievement of the SDGs. A major part thereof is a section on engagement with business. We proactively encourage public-private partnership development and companies' compliance with the principles of responsible conduct of business, including through the National Association of the UN Global Compact. We believe that achievement of Agenda 2030 will depend upon a willingness to engage by all stakeholders. The imposition of politically huge sabotage and other unilateral restrictive measures and trade barriers bring us back to the past. The future is through integration processes and political will to cooperate. That having been said, we stress the importance of achieving global issues through implementation of Agenda 2030. Thank you for your attention.
Doy las gracias a...
I thank the Minister, Special Envoy of the President of the Russian Federation, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Jose Valencia, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues. When in 2015 we adopted the 2030 Agenda, we also assumed the ambitious goal to deal with poverty and climate change in all kinds of discrimination, to combat inequality and injustice, with leaving no one behind. To fulfill the 2030 Agenda, it is important that each nation convert it into a state policy, a policy which as such incorporates all the actors involved in sustainable development within a nation, the government, the private sector, academia, then the civil society. With that purpose, the government of the President Emil Moreno decreed as a policy of the state the inclusion in public policies of Ecuador, the compliance with Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. The main instrument for planning of Ecuador is the National Development Plan 2017-2021. That's for the because of the presidential decision. This is related directly with the 2030 Agenda. During the presentation of the National Voluntary Commission in July 2013 to the Economic and Social Council, Ecuador reported on the achievements and challenges in the implementation of this. In July 2020, the coming year, my cabinet will submit its second report. We believe that we're on the right path. In fact, 2013, the President Moreno delegated to the President of the Republic the coordination and the relation of Agenda 2030, and as part of the governmental development plan. We're working in finalizing these efforts. This is a coordinated effort among many sectors in society. As I said, this area is of vital importance to fulfill the ambition to challenges of the SDGs and our plan, and to prepare, of course, for the second review in the coming year, with a view to facilitating the participation of the stakeholders and to have an accountability in the programs relating to the SDGs. We will have a platform which will implement the concept of open government. In Ecuador, at the present time, the biggest challenge with regard to the implementation of the SDGs is the territorialization without the inclusion, in other words, without a territorial plan in the communities which must, in the various provinces of the countries. A good example of the successful territorialization is the 2030 initiative, which seeks, for example, the Galapagos, that it be a sustainable territory up until 2030, and the population, the population lives only on 3% of the territory. But this has a substantial influence on the sustainability of life. We must work to make sustainable with the total change in the renewable use of, for example, sanitation, clean water, so that we can carry out the approach which I mentioned in this respect. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2019, as part of the challenge facing the government to promote a social dialogue in Ecuador, my country is promoting a national agreement 2030. The understandings resulting from this cooperative problems to build consensus, seek changes in joint decisions that are important on various issues, for example, education, employment, and sustainable climate change and sustainability. Not only the government must not only be involved here, but the social society, the civil society, they must be all on board. And I don't think we can make much progress without consensus, a joint consensus. So we are committed to public policies which establish this in order to achieve the SDGs in an inclusive, participative way. It's not a commitment to an agenda or ideas on paper. We believe this must be a commitment to the well-being and sustainable progress of our people with the future of our country. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Rasmus Prehn, the Minister of Development and Cooperation of Denmark.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world is facing a huge task. We have to chart a new course towards a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. The SDGs represent a roadmap in combination with the Paris Agreement on climate. But in too many areas, we are not on track. The challenges of our way of living are already visible. Energy transition is key. To combat climate change and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, Denmark has important lessons to share. Over the past 3 decades, Denmark has achieved economic growth while economic consumption has been steady and CO2 emissions have been reduced. We have shown that you can have it both ways, raising the standard of living while emitting less CO2. Now, we are setting new and ambitious targets. We will reduce CO2 emission by 70% by 2030, and we will achieve climate neutrality with net zero CO2 emission by 2015, at the very latest. This will not be easy, but we will do it. We will do what is necessary. At the same time, we are ready to continue to take lead on international energy transition and SDG 7. As announced yesterday, Denmark has doubled our contribution to the Green Climate Fund. We are working with Ethiopia, South Africa, Indonesia, and Mexico, and other countries on energy transition. Another key element is financing. Denmark spent 0.7% of its gross national income on development assistance, and we have done so for 40 years. But we will not reach the SDGs targets with official development assistance alone. The private sector plays an important role. Denmark will continue to build partnerships with private companies. Finally, we must be aware that SDGs do not represent a utopia. They are realistic goals with tangible targets, and they can be met. The Global Sustainable Development Report gives us good advice. Let's put it to good use. In the coming decade, our ability to act as one will be put to the test. A test that we are determined not to fail. Denmark is ready to lead this effort. Let's stand together in solidarity for the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.
Doy las gracias.
Thank you. I thank the Minister of Development Cooperation of Denmark, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mahmoud Ali Yusur, the Minister of Djibouti.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, the SDGs, since their adoption have helped the international community to adopt a shared vision that sustainable development needs to address needs of the present without imperiling the opportunities for future generations. Djibouti has advanced based on an approach of equality. We've developed our own vision for a future of a country which advocates economic growth with a human face. Following broad-ranging national and regional consultations, we adopted a development vision over the long term entitled Djibouti 2035. This was adopted by both the government and the National Assembly in March of 2014. The pillars and programs thereof have been aligned both with Agenda 2030 of the United Nations and the AU Agenda 2063. To that end, an awareness-raising and follow-up mechanism has brought together civil society, the private sector, academia, public administrations. This has been set up to see to the implementation of the operational plan and the SDGs. Amid this progress, we have opted to both build and step up the capacity of our human capital through education and universal health policies. In parallel, we've adopted a national social protection policy advancing equality in the fight against inequality, and this on the basis of a pillar of social safeguards for socioeconomic inclusion for those who are most vulnerable. The priority targets are women and children, yet coverage of social protection encompasses vulnerable people who are working age, and to ensure that there be conditions for their independence, and this extends to the elderly and persons with disabilities. We have not omitted refugees and asylum seekers on our national soil, and this as advocated within the SDGs and our solemn commitment of 2016. These individuals benefit basic social services as do their host populations. Of course, this investment for sustainable development has not prevented us from developing resilience programs to tackle the adverse consequences of global warming and population movement. These are among the consequences of tensions which frequently trouble the region. We have also set up a national investment plan for agriculture and food and nutritional security. This has helped to shore up the resistance of rural people. No doubt, ladies and gentlemen, we have opted to combat exclusion, marginalization, discrimination, to foster social cohesion, and to promote solidarity. This is a challenge for which we pay with our own resources, and the resources do not always suffice. Hence, it is important that there be support from bi- and multilateral partners. This prompts me to note that the SDGs achievement would benefit from support both in a manner that reflects national specificities, and there are many thereof, and in a manner that supports the efforts of the poorer countries. Given the non-fully mandatory nature of the SDGs, the UN could develop at times meetings to take stock of progress achieved by delivering necessary solutions and possible coordination so that there be links between wealthy countries and the least developed countries. This support framework should be given thought to in supporting developing countries so that they can accelerate social well-being. Lastly, it's incumbent upon all of us to endeavor to achieve a world which we wish to see, a better world for the well-being of our people and for present and future generations. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Djibouti. I thank him for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Alexander Chitem, the Minister of Planning of Zambia.
Thank you. Mr. President, Zambia, working together with the United Nations Development Programme and other key stakeholders, have mainstreamed 86% of the SDGs into our National Development Plan. This, Mr. Chairman, implies that the implementation of the SDGs in Zambia is being done through the implementation of the 7th National Development Plan. Therefore, monitoring and reporting on the SDGs is being undertaken using the existing structures that also monitor and report on development programs in Zambia. Mr. Chairman, in order to achieve the 2030 agenda, we need to work together in a manner that mutually reinforce our country's efforts to do so. To this effect, Zambia has developed the National SDG Coordinating Framework to guide the implementation, monitoring, and reporting on SDGs. The monitoring and reporting on SDGs through the 7th National Development Plan starts with organized structures at district level, which collectively report to provincial development committees. The structures then form into joint cluster advisory groups at national level. Mr. President, Zambia has also developed National SDG Baseline Report. This report presents a comprehensive baseline assessment of indicators that Zambia is able to report on. Given the critical role that data plays in SDG reporting, Zambia will continue to prioritize the generation of statistical data to help the country track progress on SDGs. I wish to highlight that an independent performance audit on the country's preparedness to implement the Sustainable Development Goals was conducted by the Office of the Auditor General in 2018. According to the audit results, Zambia has laid a sound foundation for implementation, monitoring, and reporting on SDGs in the country. Zambia is ready to share its experiences of good practices, lessons learned through the side events of the ESCOC high-level political forum to be held in July 2020 here in New York. Mr. President, Zambia hosts the Sub-Regional Center for SDG Goals for Africa. The SDG Center, which was launched on the 7th of August in Zambia, with the purpose of the center will be to facilitate engagement of governments and other stakeholders to accelerate attainment of SDGs and enhance capacities of homegrown interventions in this regard. I wish to underscore the fact that despite the efforts that we are making, we seem to be moving at a very, very slow pace. We need to strengthen global partnerships and enhance our financing capabilities in order to actualize what we set for ourselves under the means of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. In the absence of these efforts, the attainment of the goals, the attainment of the SDGs targets by 2030 will not be an easy journey. I thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the Minister of National Planning of Zambia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Chemakbi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، حضرات السيدات والسادة. أكدت تونس منذ اعتماد الأجندة 2030 للتنمية المستدامة في سبتمبر 2015 عزمها على تنفيذ هذه الأجندة وغاياتها، معربة عن أملها في تضافر جهود المجموعة الدولية من أجل ترجمة هذه الأهداف إلى واقع ملموس يغير الظروف المعيشية لقطاعات مجتمعية
into a lived reality and to change the lives of a number of social groups in order to help to ensure that there be better development throughout the world. My country has participated and contributed to a number of international initiatives to implement the SDGs. These include the initiative having to do with development, sustainable development, 16 plus, for communities, for fair and inclusive communities, to ensure that there be an advancement and promotion of the role of women in society. On the basis of these principles, we have adopted a number of initiatives for the SDGs at the national level. These have led to voluntary national implementation of these goals at the high-level forum under the aegis of ECOSOC. And this last July in New York, Tunisia has endeavored to incorporate these goals in our 5-year plan, 2016 to 2020. We have sought to implement an action plan to implement these goals at the sectoral level, as well as to tailor this in a regular manner. The Sustainable Development Agenda, Agenda 2030, will be of critical importance for the 2030 vision of Tunisia, which is currently being elaborated. Ladies and gentlemen, on the basis of the fact that we are facing the danger of climate change, we have both signed and ratified the Paris Agreement. This Paris Agreement, and this is a reflection of the fact that we seek to promptly undertake efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to provide a better future for future generations, and this through this for the benefit of future generations as an international priority in the building of the Second Republic. And Tunisia has experienced environmental perils. This is a consequence of climate change that needs to be addressed in decades to come. The empowerment, economic and social and political empowerment of women is among the key pillars of sustainable development. My country, when we gained independence, we have inscribed gender equality, the liberation of women, and women's economic and political empowerment in legislation. This has been inscribed in our Constitution of the Second Republic. We've adopted legislation enabling women to engage in politics and in the parliament. Thereby, women have become actors of effective change in societies. Moreover, our government and the lifeblood of our nation are tackling difficult challenges, including the economic empowerment of rural women and women who are unemployed. Ladies and gentlemen, we are striving to address the issues faced by individuals with limited means, and this through policies to counter their marginalization so as not to leave anyone behind. We are helping poor and vulnerable families. We are providing them with free care and other forms of assistance. At the Parliament, we have also ratified legislation to ensure that there be education and health, and that there be environmental issues addressed for those who are poorer amongst us. To achieve progress, ladies and gentlemen, there is a need to implement Agenda 2030. There is a need to continue to accelerate these efforts, specifically in the light of the need of the United Nations of $700,000 for this plan. We are working in an urgent way, in a holistic way, and we are delving into our own national resources, drawing upon those resources, but at the same time, we aspire to strengthen partnerships, and this owing to the importance of international and South-South cooperation to buttress international efforts, the aim of which is to achieve better development for the Tunisian people in all our groups. Thank you.
Al señor ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Túnez.
I thank the representative of Tunisia. And I now give the floor to the Minister of the Environment. Mr. President, dear friends, I bring a brotherly salute from our President, the Commander, and our Vice President, Rosario Morelos, stressing the work that is being done here at on this consideration of the SDGs. When the climate change, when the International Panel on the Climate Change said that the temperature would reach 2 degrees and there would be less water, less food, less nutrition, and more diseases, more poverty, more inequality, the challenge was established for the average global temperature of 1.5. It's absolutely essential, and we can't be postponed to comply with the implementation of the SDGs. We need to have an economic model that is new, and that with new patterns of production and consumption with different lifestyles. Some countries have made significant progress in reducing poverty and hunger, but there is still a lack of resources and the slow implementation of the SDGs in general. And there's the risk that they will not be fully achieved with all of the targets. It is important to emphasize the compliance with the SDGs, and here the importance of solidarity of the Global Alliance for Development, SDG 17, that the developing countries comply with the 0.7% of official aid to develop and 0.7 to up to 20% for the least developed countries. It's also essential for the developing countries to have access to financial, technological resources and the strengthening of their capacities. We want to reiterate, Mr. President, the commitment of our government of reconciliation and national unity in compliance with the objectives with regard to the eradication of poverty. Despite the crisis of the global economy of 2008, Nicaragua has lived through a decade of prosperity, particularly in the progress in compliance with the 17 SDGs. We have succeeded in having families and the country live in peace, security, and sustainable growth in the economy. All of these are due to the model of alliance established between the government, productive sectors, and small and medium-sized and large corporations and workers, knowing that there is a constant dialogue seeking consensus to make it possible for the country to achieve the social and economic development and growth. Also, among the important achievements in Nicaragua, there's the reduction of poverty by 42.5% in 2009, 24.9 in 14.6 in 2009, and 6.9 in 2016. The reduction of poverty, 48.3 to 24.9. It means big improvements in health and education, for consumption and of energy and public transportation. The reduction of malnutrition has been declined, and there's school children have the chronic malnutrition has been reduced. Nicaragua in 2007-2008 occupied number 5 in the countries, but after the Nordic countries with regard to the gender gap. And today we fit in 5th place The Nicaragua is above all of the developed countries, all of the European, Central American, and Caribbean countries, with the exception of the Nordic countries. According to FAO, the reduction in the inequality coefficient from 0.38 to 0.33 is an example. In 2014 and in 2018, Nicaragua had sustained economic growth more than 5% annually in the GNP, and we have extremely good results in Central America, and according to the Economic Forum, which also has noted a great improvement in the inflation. More than 40 social programs have been implemented with direct benefit for the population. One of the most successful projects was for the Nicaraguan peoples related to the direct impact and the value provided. There was a decline with the building of new houses in 2017, 2018.
¿Podemos redondear?
Sí, gracias. Finalmente, la gente.
Lastly, Agenda 2030 is an opportunity to promote human development with justice, social justice, peace, security, and with harmony, and for the Mother Earth, respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, self-determination of peoples, and ensuring the survival of the human species and the rights of Mother Earth. It is imperative for the international community to renew and put into practice its commitment. I thank the Minister of Nicaragua.
Acabamos de escuchar al
We've just heard the last speaker on the list. The closing high-level political forum on sustainable development will begin in a few moments. Please remain in your seats and for the second plenary meeting.
I call to order the closing segment of the high-level political forum on sustainable development convened under the auspices of the General Assembly. Before proceeding further, I would like to draw your attention to the report of the 2019 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. May I take it that the forum wishes to authorize me, as President, to prepare a procedural report on the forum in conformity with the practice of the United Nations? I hear no objection. It is so decided. I now invite Mr. Amir Brown to present a spoken word performance.
Good afternoon. Oftentimes, it is hard to understand how we are instruments of life to those who pass before us. Generational gaps have been widened by censorship when the eldest of our kin start telling kids to stay in their element. But when these two walls approach and are close to being enclosed, we watch those who seem role models become prone to miss human growth. And yes, I know, we are two distant realities portrayed in a world where what's major is separated by age, but it's hard for the youth. Just when you've begun to get brave, they show you the only instruments you claim are the ones getting played. You see, as soon as you've proven you've had something to say, it's the perfect time for them to make plans. A toxic environment is what we provide for this wasteland. Our tension is temperature. When it rises, our nature tends to go violent until we realize nothing can affect the climate like change can. And the fact of the matter is, I've seen people younger than me get treated like their facts never mattered. Those we look up to as masters of the masses have enslaved our every opinion, allowing us to drift from the problem and not fix it. It's a hard pill to swallow when we're poverty-stricken, but our kids must be taught to gain profit and stop the sickness because they are the prescription. Little do people know, the young ones add to this strength in numbers for a global benefit, and they become oblivious to guns with no restrictions our own government may condone. It takes you to be self-aware, but us to take a toll. And going down the line, if those from younger times have opinions and can only voice them alone, how will they cope when the rate of unemployment is shown? If our elders haven't left us on the right note, how are we to set the tone as instruments of our period? Being told don't speak unless spoken to, but we're never outspoken when we enter in with an opportunity. Food for our conscience gets restored when we offer support. We must all seek to be involved and increase jobs for the poor, whether young or old. Because above all, our main goal as instruments of the future should be to educate the youth so they can stay in sync with each other. We've seen negativity spread quick through the air we pollute due to our human error. But if we're all corrupting the weather, then how can one era be better? They say as instruments, we're made to fit in certain sections, but our best efforts can only be performed as a collective. It's impossible to find our calling if we decline and ignore those who provide the resources we need to thrive, because we can't fall flat in order to sharpen our budget and plant the seeds that will feed our kind, because it's only up to us as people in the planet to bring prosperity and peace with our partnership. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Brown for his performance. As we heard throughout the SDG Summit, the Sustainable Development Goals belong to everyone. In a moment, we'll watch a short video of actions that people across the world have been taking during the last 2 days. We'll also hear from young leaders for the SDGs about a new effort from stakeholders to kickstart the decade of action to deliver the SDGs. I now invite the forum to view the video presentation.
I toured almost all the schools in my city.
Say hello to Italian strikers.
A sensitization campaign on sustainable development goals.
Your country on board? We are here to beat plastic pollution.
I now welcome the young leaders of SDGs joining us this afternoon. I give the floor to Ms. Trisha Shetty to make a statement.
Excellencies, good afternoon. I'm Joanie Bewa, a physician, activist, SDG young leader from Benin.
Hello, my name is Burak Tolay from Cyprus. I'm one of the young leaders for the SDGs.
My name is Trisha Shetty. We would usually start with pleasantries and follow protocol to address you all, but quite frankly, we don't have time for that. Like the children who took to the streets last week, like the millions of young people who are fighting every day for a better world, we are here to say it clearly, enough is enough. Outside these grandiose walls, we live in a world where we're acutely aware of the children, families, communities who are under threat from poverty, growing inequality, and the climate crisis. Leaders of the world, you made a bold commitment to us all in 2015 by adopting the SDGs and pledging to leave no one behind. But we are failing. Far too many lives are being left behind that we are acutely aware of. We are failing. We need a dramatic change of course in 2020. This is a make or a break year for the people and for the planet. This week, the Secretary General called for ambition and action to deliver the goals. Ambition and action. As the SDG Summit comes to a close, I want to draw your attention to the hundreds of people from civil society, the private sector, and beyond that have gathered right now in the SDG Action Zone to show their commitment to a decade of action. And around the world, millions of people are showing up to fight for progress every day. So the message to you, leaders of the world, is simple. We are not here to settle for grand promises anymore. We demand for action. And we will play our part. We will commit to solutions, to mobilizing our communities, to uniting young people across the world for a super year of activism. We will hold ourselves accountable, and you can be sure we will hold you accountable. The wave of change is here, and there is only one direction to take, towards the direction of action, for people and for the planet. When we look back at 2020, let our legacy be that we did everything we could to leave no one behind. Let our legacy be one of action, courage, humanity above all. We deserve this. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Shetty for her statement. I now invite the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Her Excellency Amin Mohammed, to deliver a statement.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Professor Tijani Mohammed Bande, President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues. What an encouraging way to conclude the SDG Summit. The spoken word, the voice of youth, the commitment of civil society, the power of an active citizenry, and the leadership of our governments. Together, they remind us of the boundless potential of humanity to create a better future for all. Excellencies, I take away 3 concrete messages from your discussions over the past 2 days. First, a welcome and clear renewal of commitment by leader after leader to implement the 2030 Agenda. This is absolutely critical to respond to challenges that affect all countries: poverty, gross inequalities, discrimination against women and girls, climate change, and a rapidly deteriorating natural environment. Second, I sensed a wide recognition that we are off track to achieve the goals by 2030, and a real determination to step up with greater urgency and ambition is needed. Across the many dialogues and the numerous stakeholder meetings, we heard an impressive range of acceleration actions by governments, the private sector, local authorities, civil society, the philanthropic sector, and the scientific community, and so many more. Some of these were made in the context of the high-level meeting on universal health coverage, others made at the Climate Action Summit. All of them can catalyze a new, more impactful phase of the SDG implementation. Third, the task ahead is clear. In issuing a global appeal for a decade of action to deliver the goals by 2030, the Secretary General noted that we can still achieve the SDGs, that a transformation of the society and of the economy will be required to do so. Together with colleagues across the UN development system, I look forward to working with you to kickstart this decisive decade and to nurture more ambitious global action, local action, and people action. To conclude, I congratulate the heads of state and government, the President of the General Assembly, the co-facilitators, our distinguished ambassadors from the Bahamas and Sweden, and all of you who have helped to make this summit a success. Now let's make it a turning point for people and for planet, and deliver a decade of action in achieving the SDGs. I thank you.
I thank the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations for her statement. Deputy Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your engagement throughout this event, which comes at the outset of the 74th session of the General Assembly, the theme of which is galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. The commitments made by world leaders this week as we enter the decade of implementation are only the beginning of efforts needed. It is my hope that going forward, we will ensure more integration of the 2030 agenda into our national development plans, mobilize resources, and invest in programs and sectors that are more likely to generate greater acceleration. It is most worthy of note that leaders in the private sector are able to join us and are partnering with governments around the world to ensure that we meet the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDG Business Forum showcased actions, innovative technologies, and sustainable strategies which are key to creating a better world for all. I'm confident that the business leaders that joined us this week will continue to encourage and inspire actions, including in ensuring sustainable production practices that will get us to 2030 in a better form. While governments are responsible for national implementation, they are unable on their own to achieve the goals maximally. The SDGs are about ensuring that people everywhere have an opportunity to not just survive, but to also thrive. We must therefore continue to take inclusive actions as women, as youth, as persons with disabilities, and as civil society organizations are key to the achievement of these goals. The SDGs are a fit for multilateralism, and collective multi-stakeholder efforts are required to actualize them. The adoption of the political declaration is thus a recommitment by all member states to achieving 2030 agenda. I welcome the political statement adopted by the second high-level local and regional governments forum on the 2030 agenda, as we need action at the local level in order to deliver the SDGs. I thank you all and urge you to keep up today's momentum when we reconvene for the high-level dialogue on financing for development. I also take it that we will all come for the 2020 Summit of the United Nations, which marks its 75th anniversary, ready to report on contributions made towards achieving the SDGs. Until then, we'll undertake the review to strengthen the work of the high-level political forum on sustainable development during the session as the main platform for the follow-up and review of the 2030 agenda. I thank you. I now declare closed the 2019 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development convened under the auspices of the General Assembly.
Congratulations. It's a historical